Comic book heroes are a staple of pop culture entertainment. The heroic personalities, the larger-than-life personas, the fancy costumes, the incredible origin stories, their villainous counterparts, their world is the definition of fantasy. Comic book heroes have been around for over 85 years, with Superman being the very first superhero since making his debut in Action Comics #1 back in 1938. However, since then, there have been countless superheroes who have made their debuts within the medium of comic books, and a number of these heroes would go on to worldwide success, expanding their status just beyond comic books and into other avenues, with TV being the most prominent. One of the more popular mediums where these characters would go to showcase their worlds was in animation. Over the course of several decades, there have been many animated shows based on comic book characters, and in today's video, I will be listing my top 10 favorite superhero animated shows. And I should just go ahead and state that basically it is animated shows from both Marvel and DC. There is the Invincibles animated show from Image Comics, but that's not what I'm going for here. More in line with the shows I've grown up with over the last 4 decades. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and list my favorite superhero animated shows of all time. Number 10. The Incredible Hulk. Kicking things off with everybody's favorite green raging monster, the Hulk. The adventures of Bruce Banner dealing with his alter ego, the Incredible Hulk. This was the Hulk's 3rd animated outing. It is set at a time when Banner is constantly on the run from the military lead led by Thunderbolt Ross. This situation is made all the more complicated by the fact that Banner is in a relationship with Thunderbolt's daughter Betty, which creates a very complicated but interesting dynamic. He also has to deal with the leader, a villain whom is determined to take the Hulk's powers and fuse it into him. With all of this going on against him, Banner unfortunately gets people close to him in danger's way, including Betty and his cousin Jennifer. During an attack by Dr. Doom, who seeks to capture the Hulk for his own nefarious needs, Jennifer is injured and is given a blood transfusion from Bruce, which leads to her transformation as She-Hulk. On top of Bruce's enemy encounters, he also comes across other Marvel characters making appearances throughout the show's run, including Iron Man, War Machine, Thor, Ghost Rider, Doctor Strange, and the Thing from the Fantastic Four, adding to the richness of the show and making it somewhat of a shared universe with all these other characters. The show had a serious edge to it during its first run. This, however, changed during the 2nd season with She-Hulk being added to the show. There was also a second Hulk, Grey Hulk, who was a less savage version to the regular Hulk. This shift in tone changed the feel of the show as it was slightly campy and light-hearted. Thunderbolt Ross ends up even giving up his pursuit of the Hulk, and the show ended after 2 seasons and went out on something of a very low-key note, which was disappointing. The 1st season is what makes the show worth watching, and the complete tonal shift for the 2nd season looking back after all these years is still a little baffling. But in any event, The Hulk is a decent show and it sits as number 10 on my list. Number 9. Spectacular Spider-Man. Spectacular Spider-Man was Spider-Man's 7th animated show and one of his most memorable, albeit short-lived outings. This series takes place during Peter's high school years and is an adaptation of Stan Lee, John Romita and Steve Ditko's run in the comic books. Peter has only just recently become Spider-Man after being bitten by a radioactive spider. The show managed to keep some of the key elements of the lore of Peter Parker, including struggling to balance his newfound responsibilities of being a hero whilst dealing with his school and home life, his relationship woes with Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, getting bullied by school jock Flash Thompson, his friendship with his best friend Harry Osborn, living with his Aunt May, working at the Daily Bugle for loudmouth publisher J. Jonah Jameson, all the usual Spider-Man traits we have come to know. But the show did make a few different choices in this iteration. The biggest change for me was the addition of Eddie Brock, whom in this world is something of an older brother figure to Peter and one of his best friends. This is a completely different dynamic between the characters, but there is a build up to how they grow apart and become enemies. Brock eventually becoming the villain known as Venom. Gwen Stacy, also in this world, is something of a shy introvert who is not amongst the most popular girls. A bit of a change from what she was depicted in the comic books under the Lee, Romita and Ditko run, where she was more of the popular girl. Mary Jane, as we all know, is Peter's eventual true love, but in this show they are just friends and she is more of the party girl, accurately depicting that version here of what we saw in the comic books. On top of all this are the plethora of Spidey villains. The episodes were nicely paced and developed a lot of continuity with built-in story arcs. The action sequences were entertaining, there was a lot of character building with Peter's foes, and there was a very entertaining depiction of Spider-Man, which sadly only lasted 2 seasons of 26 episodes, but for the time that it was on, it was a very entertaining show. Number 8. Superman the Animated Series. In the world of DC Comics, Batman and Superman always existed in the same universe. And with Batman the Animated Series' great success, it was only a matter of time before Superman came along and was given his own show. Making its debut on September the 6th, 1996, this version of Superman paid tribute to both the classic Superman of old and the new modern version. Whilst Batman was dark and grounded more in reality, Superman was brighter and more flamboyant in a fantasy setting. And unlike Batman, who was already established when his show began, Superman the Animated Series starts with a 2-part story tracing his origins back to Krypton, with the planet exploding and his father Jor-El sending him to Earth and being the last survivor of Krypton. He's adopted by the Kents, and over time, as he gets older, he develops his powers and eventually goes on to become Superman. He has quite an impressive rogue gallery and takes on several meta-powered villains. Lex Luthor is his main adversary despite not having any powers, but a lot of money, wit and cunning as he challenges Superman. There are a number of memorable villains like the energy-draining Parasite, the human cyborg Metallo, whom is powered by kryptonite, which is Superman's source of weakness, Livewire, a former radio jockey who is accidentally infused with electricity, the Kryptonian AI robot Brainiac, the powerful Darkseid. These are just a handful of the enemies that he had to take on. This version of Superman is somewhat weaker to his comic counterparts, as he always seemed to get beaten almost easily at times by some of these villains. The producers have admitted that he was somewhat toned down, so he wasn't as powerful, which made for a more challenging dynamic for him against his foes. I found this a bit frustrating, as it was very similar to what was seen in Batman the Animated Series, when he would get taken out way too soon. But it proved that he could take a licking and keep on ticking. As well as taking on his enemies, he was living his life as reporter Clark Kent for the Daily Planet and dealing with his partner Lois Lane. Lane was into Superman, but she was not into Clark Kent, which made for a very interesting situation. The stories were very well written and produced, and the voice acting gave it a lot more gravitas. And given that it was the same team that produced Batman the Animated Series, this is really no surprise. All in all, this is a very well produced animated show and a great depiction of the Man of Steel. Number 7. Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Just like Spectacular Spider-Man, this was a very well entertaining written show which was cut short after only lasting 2 seasons at 52 episodes. It was based on the original comics run of stories by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It was also around the time when the MCU was taking off, with Iron Man, Hulk, Cap and Thor all having their solo outings on the big screen, and therefore increasing the popularity of these characters. They take on some of the most dangerous supervillains in Baron Zemo, Kang the Conqueror and Ultron, to name a few. The animation, the tone and the pacing of the show really gave a whole new life to this group of Marvel characters. The stories were brilliantly written and the voice acting was very good. The action scenes were a lot of fun. There were interesting story arcs that built up over the course of its 2-season run. By the time I had gotten around to watching this series, the first Avengers movie had just come out, and that was the real catalyst for me getting into the Avengers as a whole, even though this show actually came out first. Over time I had revisited and watched the show, and it really is an underrated work of art. It even featured appearances from other Marvel characters like Spider-Man and Wolverine. Speaking of which, there had been plans to bring the X-Men into the 3rd season and do an Avengers vs X-Men story arc, just like we saw in the comic books. Sadly, this never came to fruition. And on top of that, the show was replaced with the very awful Avengers Assembled, which was done to reflect the already established MCU movies by ensuring the base characters from the movie were featured, and what you got as a result was a vastly inferior show. Overall, Avengers EMH is an excellent series, and despite its only 2-season run, it managed to produce a brilliant showcase for Iron Man, Cap and Co. Number 6. Batman Beyond. The successor to the highly acclaimed Batman the Animated Series. The show is set in a futuristic Gotham about 20 years after Bruce decides to give up being Batman, as a rescue mission went awry and he nearly went against his moral code of never killing any of his adversaries. Enter Terry McGinnis, a young teenage delinquent whom by accident discovers that old Bruce Wayne was the original Batman. Terry suffers a major tragedy when his father is murdered by the villain Mr. Fix-It, working under his boss Derek Powers, who is the real mastermind behind the whole situation. Terry's father had discovered the illegal production of chemical weapons, and Powers had him taken out. Seeking vengeance, Terry returns to Bruce for help, but only gets told to go to the authorities. Terry refuses this, and he ends up stealing the Batsuit to carry out his own justice. Bruce reluctantly agrees to allow Terry to use the suit and take down Mr. Fix-It and Powers. The result sees Fix-It get his comeuppance, and Powers ends up becoming the villainous Blight after an accident. Bruce then decides to bring Terry into his world and serve as his chauffeur, which was a disguise to allow him to become the new Batman for the new futuristic Gotham. When the show was being conceived, the network executives were looking at a teenage Batman for kids. According to producer Bruce Timm, the pilot episode of this show is what was shown, much to the executives' horror. However, the show was allowed to continue, and thank goodness for that. The show was neo-futuristic looking with a very dark tone. The villains in this show were very outlandish and unique, with characters like Curare, Ink, Spellbinder, and the Royal Flush Gang. There were also encounters with some classic Batman villains like Mr. Freeze, Ra's al Ghul, and the Joker, but this was via Batman Beyond, the feature-length movie. Even better for this series was Kevin Conroy reprising his role as Bruce Wayne, but not Batman, as he serves in a secondary advisory role this time around, but he still plays a very important role. The honour for the new Batman went to voice actor Will Friedle of Boy Meets World fame. The legendary Adrian Romano voice directs this show, and it delivers on all fronts in terms of storytelling, voice acting, and action. It also served as a blueprint with the two-part story arc The Call, which paved the way for another future DC animated show in the Justice League. A very hard-hitting and brilliantly animated show, adding to the legacy of the Batman. Number 5. Spider-Man TAS. My personal favourite Spider-Man cartoon of all time, making its debut in November of 1994 and running for 5 seasons at 65 episodes. This story did very well to adapt story arcs and characters from the comics and interpret them in this series. Unlike Spectacular Spider-Man, this show sees Peter enroll at Empire State University and try to balance his study life with being Spider-Man and taking care of his Aunt May, whilst navigating his friendship with best friend Harry Osborn and dealing with his relationship issues with Felicia Hardy and of course Mary Jane. Spider-Man can be credited with having one of the most interesting role galleries in superhero history. This show is stacked full of some of the most memorable villains, including the Kingpin, the Hobgoblin, the Chameleon, Alistair Smythe, Rhino, Scorpion, Carnage, Venom, and arguably his greatest foe, the Green Goblin. The show took time to build the background story arcs for a good number of these villains, and it added to the overall ambience of the show. There was also an abundance of guest stars from the Marvel Universe. Some memorable story arcs in this series include the Neogenetic Nightmare, which slowly saw Pete transform into a man-spider. There was the Secret Wars adaptation when the Beyonder selects Spider-Man and gets him to build a team with other Marvel heroes and take on some of the most dangerous foes in the Marvel Universe. There is also the final arc of Multiple Spider-Man, which saw Ben Reilly make an appearance on the show. Overall, the series did very well to not just take and adapt stories from the comic books, but also make it unique enough for them to stand out in their own right, as opposed to just being straight up copies. There was definitely more room, I feel, for more episodes, but the run ended after 65 episodes. But it was supposedly due to disagreements between producer Avi Arad and network head Margaret Loesch. However, this has now been since debunked, as producer John Sempler said it was simply due to funding issues, as their producer New World had gone out of business and there was no company able to do the funding. Regardless, it was an excellent showcase and is one of the most memorable animated runs for Spider-Man. Number 4. The Justice League. The success of Batman the Animated Series was such that it helped create the DC Animated Universe. It brought together some of DC's biggest names with Superman, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, Hawkgirl, and making her long-awaited return to the world of animation since the Super Friends show, Wonder Woman. The show follows the events of both Superman the Animated Series and Batman Gotham Knights. An impending alien invasion is coming to Earth. Superman is warned telepathically by imprisoned Martian John Jones, who goes on to become the Martian Manhunter. Wonder Woman, against the wishes of her mother Hippolyta of Themyscira, joins in on the battle to save mankind from the impending invasion. John Stewart, Green Lantern, The Flash, and Hawkgirl join in the fray and team up to stop the invasion. Following these events, they go on to form the Justice League, and they take on various superpowered threats. Now, the thing of note here is that a number of these villains came from Superman's world as they deal with foes like Lex Luthor, Darkseid, Brainiac, and Lobo. You did have a number of Batman's foes like Poison Ivy and the Joker, but the presence of this style of villains was reflective of the kind of world that the Justice League was operating in. So that is why I guess we didn't see the likes of the Mad Hatter or Scarecrow. The Justice League did well to build up characters and story arcs, which is very much an ensemble show with all 7 members getting plenty of time to stand out. Coming into this show, not a lot was known about Hawkgirl or Green Lantern John Stewart, and the show did well to feature them quite a bit and build them up as key players in this show. It eventually leads to a relationship between the two. The Flash had made an appearance on Superman the Animated Series. He too got featured on here prominently. But the thing I was surprised about was that this was not Barry Allen, as I had been familiar with, but it was Wally West. Martian Manhunter was given time to build up his character, and in turn solidifying his importance to the team. Wonder Woman had never had her own animated show, which actually was quite incredible to think about, as she is part of the Holy Trinity of DC. This show gave her her own arcs and time to stand out from the group. Initially she's very wary of man's world, but over time grew to accept it and appreciate it. The voice cast seems to be a trademark of great successful shows from a DC animated series, and the voices on display here give great life to the show. Overall, the Justice League is a great ensemble show with great action, great voice acting, engaging stories, just an overall top show. Number 3. The X-Men. The X-Men were amongst Marvel's most successful characters within the comic books, and this show helped solidify them as a top tier act. Released on October 31st, 1992, this show was a hit, as it followed the adventures of a group of mutants who are formed and are sworn to protect the human race who fear and despise them. This show was a great advert for fighting against bigotry and intolerance. It told great stories without feeling too preachy or beliefs being shoved in your face. The show is heavily influenced by the early 1990 Jim Lee X-Men comic run, as the look of the characters is taken directly from that comic book series. The lineup consists of Cyclops, Gambit, Rogue, Storm, Jubilee, Jean Grey, Beast, Professor Charles Xavier aka Professor X, and Wolverine. A primarily ensemble cast, as there were specific episodes dedicated to a single character giving them their own personal story arcs. As well as dealing with the hatred of humanity towards them, the X-Men also had to deal with various villains with superpowers. You had Mr. Sinister, who had a fascination with Cyclops and Jean Grey as he wanted their DNA to help him build an army of superpowered mutants. There was Sabretooth, Wolverine's arch-nemesis. There was the Friends of Humanity led by Graydon Creed, the son of Sabretooth, the first and most powerful mutant on Earth who proved to be one of their most formidable enemies, which culminated in a 4-part story Beyond Good and Evil, The Mighty Apocalypse. There was also Magneto, Professor X's best friend turned enemy, on opposing sides when it came to dealing with humanity. The show did extremely well to adapt comic book story arcs like Days of Future Past, in which there is an assassination attempt on Senator Kelly, with Gambit being their prime suspect, and in actuality, it is another X-Men foe in the form of Mystique. The Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas, which saw Jean become one with the entity known as the Phoenix in order to stop the threat of Terrant Diken from the Shi'ar Empire. This later leads to the Phoenix itself becoming corrupted and turning evil in the process. The sagas are brilliantly adapted from the comics and set a standard of a faithful adaptation, unlike the movies. Like all Marvel shows, there are appearances from other Marvel alum. In its prime, X-Men garnered very high ratings for a Saturday morning cartoon show, reaching approximately 23 million households. Haim Saban credits the success of this series in assisting him to sell his next future project to Fox, a little show you might have heard of called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Nope, never heard of it. There can be no doubting the success of this show as it led to future Fox movies and all of the animated adaptations. To this day, it is still considered the best X-Men animated series. And with the follow-up series X-Men 97 in the works, time will tell if this still follows the spirit of this show. X-Men the Animated Series, a certified classic animated superhero show. Number 2, Justice League Unlimited. Now technically I could have put this and Justice League together, but in essence they are two separate shows. Justice League focused on the core 7 founding members. This show looks at the wider DC universe and features other various DC superheroes. Now I had a little gripe with this one as it meant we saw less of the original lineup, and I would have personally preferred a separate show that focused on the original lineup and could cross over with this show from time to time. But my personal wishes aside, this show took what was established with the Justice League and took it even further. The stories were a lot more mature, and this led to semi-adult themes like sexy innuendos and more animated violence than previously seen in the last iteration of Justice League. As stated earlier, the wider DC universe was looked at here, and we saw characters like Supergirl, Captain Atom, Shazam, and Green Arrow take center stage. This actually got me more interested in them as a whole, and I would look forward to their own personal story arcs on this show. Supergirl in particular had a very interesting story, with her being the subject of a nefarious plan known as Project Cadmus, which saw her get cloned as part of a plan to frame and destroy the Justice League. In keeping with the theme of Superman villains used primarily over Batman villains in this universe, Lex Luthor is at his most diabolical best, being the mastermind behind Project Cadmus, fusing with another Superman villain in Brainiac in a very shocking sequence. Lex Luthor also managed to grab the one power that another Superman alum Darkseid craved, the anti-life equation. Lex was simply all over this series run. The dark and edgy side of Superman was exposed due to Lex's scheming, with Supes almost coming off as a low-key villain at times with his over-effusive approach to dealing with their enemies. Now, Justice League Unlimited came about, according to producer Bruce Timm, due to the network ordering 2 more seasons of Justice League, except they wanted it rebranded and in the old school format of a singular 30-minute episode. The 3-part story star-crossed from Justice League was supposed to be the final run of Justice League as a whole. Now, this was an ensemble show like Justice League, but on an even bigger scale due to the large cast of characters. A number of characters got featured multiple times, and they had their own story arcs in addition to the ones that featured the original cast. The action sequences are turned up by 10, the storylines are a lot more engaging, and as always the voice acting is superb. If I had any criticisms of this show, it would be A. It ended way too soon and could have gotten at least 1 more season, and B. The OG cast didn't feature as much. They only appeared together as a whole team just a small handful of times. Now that aside, it was good to see all the other characters and enjoy the stories that they were part of. Justice League Unlimited is an excellent successor to Justice League, and it is one of the very best superhero animated shows ever. Number 1. Batman the Animated Series. Given this show's influence on some of the other shows on this list, it would have been absolutely criminal if I didn't include it on this list. But here it is, and it's number 1 with a bullet. It was an absolute groundbreaking show. There had not been any animated shows quite like it before its release. The series was seen as a primetime show as opposed to a kids animated series. Given the rather mature themes and dark tones, this was simply not a villain of the week, I'm going to destroy Batman and rule Gotham City. Nope. There was a lot of psychological aspects to the villains. Two-Face, for example, is District Attorney Harvey Dent, who is the victim of a dual personality which is gradually taking over. Harvey is accidentally caught during an explosion, which leaves him permanently scarred, and his evil persona takes over fully, leaving him as the villain Two-Face permanently. This was one example of the psychological build-up of a character and the impact it had on the show. Batman the Animated Series ran for 109 episodes over 3 seasons. It later was retitled The Adventures of Batman, with Robin featuring more prominently. The Batman's greatest adversary, the Joker, is one of the best things about this show. The constant battle between the two, Batman's refusal to kill him as it goes against his code of ethics. The chemistry is very much embodied by the voice portrayals of both Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, whom are the definitive Batman and Joker in the eyes of all Batman fans. The show was at times slow and methodically paced, and Batman would get beaten up quite easily at times, another source of frustration for me. I mean, he goes on later to join the Justice League and he takes on superpowered villains, and in this build he gets beaten up by dangerous villains who have no superpowers. I just found that quite jarring at times. That aside, there can be no question about what a great show this is. The artwork, the symphony score, the drama, the action, the world-class voice acting. Simply put, without the show's success, the rest of the DC animated universe does not exist. An all-time superhero classic, an all-time great animated show, and an all-time great TV show. Batman, the animated series. And that right there was my top 10 list of superhero animated shows. And of course this was mainly Marvel and DC characters, and there are other animated shows characters out there like Spawn, but these are the shows that I've grown up with, and a lot of them were from a preteen to an adult. But I think we can all agree that a lot of the shows on this list are top tier, highlighted by the fact that currently there are no animated shows from either DC or Marvel that are quite producing shows of this quality. What if? Okay, but I don't think it's as good as these. The quality writing, excellent comic book adaptations, the voice acting and all the action make all of these shows amazing and top class. And with that all said, I am K-Man of Smug Peeps Entertainment, and that was my top 10 list of superhero animated shows. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and if you want to see more, please remember to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.